Great. So, thank you all for joining. Like I said, there are more people still trickling in every second or so. My name is Rafi Krikorian. I'm an MIT alum, a former MIT Media Lab graduate student, and once upon a time, I was a VP of engineering at Twitter. So I spent a lot about my career helping build the kinds of systems our kids now kind of use every day, which is why this conversation we're about to have means so much to me. So I think we all have these instincts about the impact of social media on teens. But what I'm really excited by having both Dr. Prinstein and Dr. Tesler here is that like we can actually talk about the data behind what we are all feeling in some way. So we're incredibly fortunate to have the two people that are sort of leading that science. So quick introductions. Dr. Mitch Prinstein is the Chief Science Officer at the American Psychological Association and a professor of psychology and neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill. His work looks at how technology and peer dynamics shape adolescent development. He's been a national voice on helping parents, educators, etc., understand what's going on in this intersection of the teenage brain and technology. And joining him is Dr. Eva Tesler, a professor of psychology and neuroscience, also at UNC Chapel Hill, and the director at the Winston National Center on Technology Use, Brain, and Psychological Development. Her lab is doing fascinating work, including longitudinal studies on habitual social media check-in usage and things like that, that I'm hoping she'll get to as part of this talk. Um, what I'm hoping is that they're not here to scare us, but mostly to wake us up to the kinds of problems and what the research is actually showing and what it means for the lives of our kids and the kids in our lives. So just some very quick ground rules. Like I said, um, like I said, we are recording this. Um, Dr. Princeton and Dr. Tesla will go for maybe about, let's call it 40 minutes, and then we'll turn it over for questions from the audience. Um, so with that, Mitch and Eva, I'll turn it to you if that's okay.
Great. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. And we're really happy to tell you what we've been learning on this topic. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Actually, we have so much to tell you. We're just going to dive right in. Thank you so much for that great introduction. It's probably no surprise to anybody who's been looking around over the last 40 years or so that when young people are interacting with one another together, it doesn't look like this anymore. It doesn't look like this anymore. It looks like that. And we're here to talk a little bit about why this is happening and what this might be doing to change literally the social context that kids are being brought up in. In some ways, we're seeing a mirroring of what happened offline now happens online. But in many more ways, and in concerning ways, we're seeing that the online environment has substantially changed the context that teens grow up in these days. And that has potentially important implications for how we think about brains, development, intellectual development, and mental health. So let's talk about the brain just really quickly. We all have heard of puberty. We all know that the body rapidly undergoes many dramatic changes, starting in those tween and teen years. But you may not be as familiar with how the brain changes during those years. It too is developing. It's starting its second most substantial growth and reorganization period of our lifetimes following the first year of life. It is changing starting about a year or two before we see external signs of puberty on the outside of the body. So that means around 10 or 11, the brain is starting to undergo that substantial period of growth. And that's happening region by region, from the back to the front, from the subcortical areas, the areas that are common with most other mammals, to the very human cortex that kind of sits on top. So that's important because one of the very first areas of the brain that starts developing is referred to as the anterior cingulate cortex, in particular, an area called the ventral striatum within it is suddenly filled with new receptors for two brain substances that I bet you've heard of. One is oxytocin, makes us really interested in bonding with others, especially others our age. Even mice during adolescence only want to hang out with other adolescent mice rather than adult mice. And the second substance is called dopamine. And it makes it feel really good when we're getting any kind of attention, praise, positive reinforcement from peers. Well, that's really important because that means at 10 or 11 years old, suddenly your parents are, quote, like totally so lame. They're rolling their eyes. They're only wanting to talk about who's popular and what kids are wearing and who sits at what lunch table. And that's all fine when you live in a world where you can only get that kind of peer feedback during the school hours. But now we live in a world where peer feedback can come at the click of a button 24/7. And this is a mismatch with how the adolescent brain has evolved until now, because unlike adults, there's an area of the brain that kids have not developed yet. The very prefrontal cortex, last part of the brain to develop, right under the forehead, which is kind of like the brain's brakes. And it says, stop, don't pursue every possible impulse that you have, including impulses to get peer feedback all the time. So here's another way of what this looks like. We have this rapid increase in kids wanting to get lots and lots and lots of peer feedback. That's creating this big gap between when kids can stop themselves from pursuing that feedback at all times of day. And it's for this reason that from around the age when most kids get their device, 10, 11, 12, all the way into the early 20s, that we suddenly see this incredible fixation on using devices, screens, platforms like social media. So we're going to talk about that, but we want to just mention a couple of assumptions. We want to acknowledge that technology use is not a homogeneous experience. How you use tech today is probably different from how you used it yesterday or tomorrow. We want to mention that there are many devices out there that we now have access to. We're still learning about those, not just phones, but smart watches, tablets, even now necklaces, your friend necklace that will walk around with you and see and hear and respond to everything you experience in life, and devices that are even issued to kids in school, maybe as early as kindergarten. We want to mention that when we talk about social media, we're talking about a big basket of different things here. We've got content that's posted on social media, either by a human or by a bot, content that might have been posted by the user themselves. Then we've got functions around the platform that change how we process that content. An infinite scroll, a comments feature, a notifications feature, a like button. And then, of course, we have AI that might be generating new content or directing us to content we may or may not have asked for. And this is important. Research has shown that if you show people the exact same content with an icon that says that the content got lots of likes, or without the icon, then it changes how the brain is processing that information. Suddenly, the presence of likes on content that's illegal, immoral, harmful, shows the like button deactivates the prefrontal cortex. In other words, whereas normally kids would see harsh, inappropriate content and be hesitant to approach that content, now we see that simply the presence of the like button and showing that it's gotten many likes makes kids not inhibited towards that content anymore in terms of the brain. We should also acknowledge, and many of you on this audience might know, but there are many folks who are still learning, that there are different kinds of AI, including generative AI, now companion AI, and even AI that's been created for young kids age 0 to 6 in the form of toys. At the Winston Center, we are committed in an objective way to understanding all of the ways that tech might be related to human well-being, but we do not look at this as saying that all of tech is good or all of tech is bad, and we don't think of screen time as being really a great measure of much of anything, because it depends on what screen and how you're using it and what functions. So our vision at the Winston Center is really to focus under what conditions and for which specific kids might some kind of tech be helpful and some kind of tech might be harmful to youth development. And we do so by answering many different questions that we're going to very rapidly review right now, just to give you a taste of what we're starting to learn and see in the field. And when we unpack the question, not just is screen time good or bad, but as I mentioned before, what are the specific ways that we can understand what's helping and what's harming? So I'm going to dive right in, and Dr. Telzer and I are going to split up the rest of the presentation to tell you a little bit about what we're seeing so far. And one is, of course, that there is positive potential that can come from technology that we're seeing. Smart devices, including smart watches, are becoming very popular even when kids are young, remarkably, in large part to address parental anxiety in an increasingly challenging world where school violence is happening and changes to schedules are occurring, and parents need to know where their kids are and able to locate or contact them at all time. We know that school issued devices can be used for educational based technology. And research has clearly shown that when you turn memorizing the multiplication tables into a gamified kind of video game that allows kids to gain points and, stickers and stars, it does help the learning process become a bit more fun. Social media does seem to be something that helps us connect with others, particularly if we're part of a minoritized identity. And it's hard to find others in our school, community, or even in our own homes who shares the same gender, sexual, racial, ethnic, religious identity that we may share. And we need to have support from others who experience the same minority of stress that we might experience. And social media can provide that in the form of online only friends. In fact, we do see that on social media, folks have more diversity among their online peer contacts than among their in real life companions. So there's potential for positivity there. AI chatbots have the potential to allow folks who can't access healthcare to get information, including mental health care, from others or resources to help them in a situation where they might be having a tough time. We're going to circle back to talking about some of the limitations of that, but do want to acknowledge that there is some potential for positivity and good outcomes. But it's all about how you use technology. And one of the things that we found very early in our research was that when we talked with teens about how they used social media platforms, we found that the majority said that what they do when they get online is compare themselves to others. And they forget that what they're seeing is a very curated, not representative version of what others look like or what their lives look like. We've all seen the family fighting, 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 then posing for a beautiful selfie in front of a tourist spot, and then going back to fighting. But those kids kind of don't realize that that wasn't exactly what their family looks like. Happy, out in a beautiful space, traveling to exotic places all the time. And as a result, we find that kids are noticing that they don't look the way they want to look. They're not invited to the parties they want to go to. They're not experiencing the happiness and harmony that people most likely project. And as a result, these are what's referred to as upward social comparisons, or an attempt to get more and more likes and more followers, but there's always someone that has more than you. And as a result, we see this form of social media use related to increases in depression, anxiety, and weight related behaviors, which used to be in particular among females, but it's important to know this is happening now among males as well. Also wanted to talk a little bit about the experiences of cyber hate. A recent study was looking specifically at minoritized teens from a racial and ethnic minoritized group and found that while there is the potential for positive interactions, in fact, this very research study found that about 2.8 times a day, African American or Black youth are finding positive depictions of their race and ethnic identity online. That's unfortunately offset with 3.2 instances per day on average of seeing explicit racism online, seeing racial trauma online, or seeing algorithmic biases that are portraying good things, usually as being white, depicting people who are identify as white. As a result, we're seeing that the net is that folks are experiencing more anxiety and depression following bullying or cyber hate online, even after accounting for the kinds of racism they experience offline. And the reason why is because offline, what's often happening more often than not are what's sometimes referred to as microaggressions, things that are clearly offensive, but might be communicated in a way that's somewhat subtle or ambiguous and is very off-putting. Online, these are not microaggressions. They're usually quite explicit hostile outbursts that are directed towards a person or a group of people based on their identity. And then there's also the pylon of all the comments and the notifications that come to direct people to this comment. And this is likely explaining why we see kids experiencing even more harm. Even if they're experiencing racism offline, they're experiencing more injury from what's happening online. This is affecting the anxiety and depression of those targeted, as well as bystanders who are not members of that identity group. And interestingly, even though some kids are seeing positive depictions of race, those positive experiences are not significantly related to anxiety or depression. So they're getting the worst and they're not benefiting from the best. Many of you may realize that it doesn't take very long these days when you're online, whether this is about AI chatbots or particularly on social media, before kids are being directed, often through AI suggested content, towards information that teaches them how to engage in disordered behavior. For instance, one demonstration that was done took a brand new phone out of the box, downloaded nothing, no apps except one, to look at short form videos, entered a profile as a 15-year-old girl and watched no videos, typed nothing in the search bar, no cookies for those of you that are aware of how some of these things are tracked on your device. Within 20 minutes, this short form video platform was sending content to this brand new user on how to engage in anorexia like behaviors, simply based on the algorithm indicating that a 15-year-old girl would likely be interested in knowing how to engage in dangerous weight related management behaviors. Similarly, research has demonstrated that there is quite a lot of content on that teaches kids how to engage in non suicidal self injury, which is trying to harm yourself, harm your body tissue without trying to die. Cutting is the most frequent example of this. These are old data from YouTube. And at the time, there was about a quarter of the information on there was actually encouraging kids to cut more often and to teach them exactly how to do so. Now, YouTube has since changed their rules and they don't have this online anymore. But TikTok in America has not. In fact, there are many live streaming suicide attempts that are happening online as well. And many kids, by the time they reach the end of high school, report that they have been exposed to this. Here's an example of some of that pro-anorexia or pro-ana content that the vast majority of adolescent females say they have been directed to without them asking to see it. All kinds of information with art, poems, social rules, encouraging kids to binge, purge, fast, engage in excessive exercise or laxative use. And tragically, if kids ever report that they're moving away from disordered behavior, they're actually sanctioned by others in the group saying, we're not going to be your friend anymore. You have to continue doing these dangerous behaviors to stay in our electronic group. There's also a remarkable effect of peer influence that's now happening online. We know that when you read something on, let's say, an article that you're reading in the paper, and if you dare go to the comments section, you might see some things on there that makes your blood boil and makes you feel immediately very upset. How could half the country really feel that way? But it might not be half the country. It might be that there just happens to be one or two of the most radical people out there happen to have commented on that post. But that's not the conclusion we all jump to very often. We tend to assume that what we're seeing represents many, many others' opinions. Well, this is especially the case for teens, as demonstrated in this research study that found that when young kids were exposed to social media, talking about how fun it might be to start drinking alcohol, and these were kids in 8th grade, it sure enough was related to a huge increase in them believing that all of their 8th grade friends thought it was absolutely acceptable to drink 5 or more alcoholic drinks on a single night. And that's referred to as heavy episodic drinking. That's a lot of alcohol for an 8th grader, a potentially lethal amount. Well, once kids did perceive that their friends thought it was cool, That, in fact, led to their first episode of heavy episodic drinking just a few months later, really demonstrating that the likes that are attached to content change the way in which we make estimations about others and ultimately our own behavior. Now, this is happening for a wide array of behaviors, and it could happen for adaptive behavior as well. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that as often. And one of the reasons why is because we know that next to the ventral striatum is an area of the brain called the ventral pallidum. It's part of the brain's motivational network. And it basically says, whatever just gave you a dopamine hit, go get more of it. But it's motivating you towards that behavior in a subcortical way, in a way that we would describe in our language as an instinct or a drive or a craving. We're not aware of it. We just seem to be more tempted to do it. And it seems that the algorithms might be tuned to knowing that things that make us angry or things that make us fearful are particularly potent ways of activating the ventral pallidum. So as a result, the things that kids are most likely to see are those things that are going to make them angry or fearful. And that's why those things get sent to the top of the algorithm. This is why we're seeing so much peer influence and risky behavior following online engagement. Before turning it over to Dr. Telzer, I just wanted to mention that for those of us that did not grow up with a device, it's remarkable to talk to kids about this because while they love being on their technology, they also hate it at the same time. And there's been a lot of research talking about this mixed emotional relationship they have, in part because, as they say, it's a full-time job. They are not online for fun. They feel that they have to be online. It's something that researchers refer to as digital stress. And it's made up of a combination of having all of your devices beeping at you and texting you and telling you to get back on the platforms. Think about it. If when you were 13, someone told you that the most popular girl or boy in school just posted something and tagged you in it, of course you would have to go on immediately and take a look at it. For them, this is the time when they are craving social rewards with that dopamine and oxytocin. So, of course, they're going to feel that they have to answer every one of those notifications. Of course, they're going to be scared that if they don't, they're going to miss out on important information that everyone will be talking about without them or at school tomorrow. If their friends post a selfie and they don't go online and say how great they look in that selfie, their friends will literally get mad at them in today's day and age. How dare you do that? How dare you leave me on red with the text that I sent you over 10 minutes ago? This is a lot of pressure for them. And when we asked undergraduates at UNC Chapel Hill, how long do you spend looking at your own posts to make sure that they're getting favorable comments and likes? We had a remarkable amount of very smart UNC undergrads tell us, on average, 30 minutes. I post something and I do nothing for the next 30 minutes but stare at my phone and make sure it's getting comments or likes. And if it's not, they have to text their friends and tell them, how dare you not put nice comments and likes? So it's really a lot of stress, so much so that 45% of kids in early high school years report that digital stress is interfering with their ability to engage in daily roles and routines like homework, sleep, exercise, daily hygiene. And the more they experience digital stress, the more depression they report a year later. And that makes sense. We know that one of the most important predictors of depression for young people is interpersonally themed stress. Okay, let me pause here and turn it over to Dr. Telzer.
Great, thank you. So, one of the really core areas in which technology is interfering with adolescents' ability to thrive is when it comes to sleep. The majority of adolescents are sleep deprived. This is a figure here showing the percent of students in the high school years who are getting the recommended 8 hours of sleep per night. And while ninth graders, about 40% of them are getting the needed sleep, only about 20% of 12th graders are getting the recommended sleep. So there is just on average a sleep epidemic where adolescents are severely sleep deprived. This isn't even taking into consideration the role of technology yet. And this is concerning because poor sleep is linked to a host of negative outcomes. Adolescents who get poor sleep are more likely to be obese, depressed, engage in greater risky behaviors, and engage more poorly in school. Now, when we take technology into account, there are pretty extreme effects. There have been meta-analyses that show that the majority of adolescents are engaging in technology use in the hours before bedtime. Most adolescents sleep with their phones right next to them, and nighttime smartphone use is associated with poor sleep health. So when adolescents are using their phones, largely in the domain of social media use, and in part, like Dr. Prinstein was saying, because of this digital stress, they feel the need to be connected 24/7. They can't put their phones down. This is interfering with their sleep. It delays their sleep onset, both because of the mere fact that they're on their phones, but also the blue light emitted from their phones delays the release of melatonin, and so they're biologically incapable of going to sleep earlier. Because they go to sleep later, they end up getting less sleep because they have to wake up for school the next day. So they can't make up for that later sleep duration by sleeping in. So they get less sleep. They get more fragmented sleep as well. When adolescents reach for their phone in the middle of the night after they've fallen asleep, if they wake up in the middle of the night, if they reach over for their phone during that wake event in the middle of the night is extended. It's even longer. And this is uh, causing fragmented sleep, poor quality sleep overall. And this is very concerning because more variable and fragmented sleep is related to declines in brain health across adolescents. So when adolescents are getting more variable sleep throughout the night. This is a figure showing white matter in their brain is not developing how it should be. The white matter in the brain is what makes information flow more quickly in the brain, and this should be increasing across adolescents. But when adolescents are getting poor quality sleep, that white matter development is impaired. And so one of the easiest, quickest pieces of advice that we can give any adolescent or even adults is to keep the phone away from adolescents in the hours before sleep, and to certainly not sleep with a phone next to the bedside, because when they wake up in the middle of the night and reach for it, that is impacting their sleep pretty severely. Now, there's a point at which social media behaviors can become especially problematic and interfere with adolescents' functioning to the point at which it resembles more addictive behaviors. So what we have done is we've taken the DSM criteria for drug and substance abuse and changed out the words with substance use. So for example, instead of cocaine, we put in the word social media. And we've asked adolescents these questions. You may want to reflect on them yourself as we go through them, because it's not just affecting adolescents. Many adults themselves are also engaging in problematic social media behaviors. So, for example, do you ever feel like you spend more time on social media than you intended? Have you ever tried to spend time away from social media, but you couldn't do it? Do you ever expend extra effort to make sure you'll have access when you might not otherwise have it? Do you have cravings or strong desires for social media? Does it get in the way of things you're supposed to be doing, like sleep? I think we already answered that question for the majority of adolescents. The answer is yes. Exercise, schoolwork, and so on. And then we also ask adolescents if they think that they might be addicted to social media. And perhaps not surprisingly, when we look at the data from our adolescents, nearly all of them are reporting that they're spending more time on social media than they intended. About half are reporting that being away from social media results in experiencing difficulties engaging with their daily life and activities, and about 25% perceive that they are either moderately or severely addicted to social media. So these platforms are clearly engaging adolescents in a way that is becoming problematic and interfering with their daily lives. And this is by no accident. If you look at some of the materials that have been released in some litigation against TikTok and Meta, for example, we can see that some of their internal documents are showing that these platforms are designed in order to engage adolescents, and that, for example, teenagers in the US are a golden audience. The product itself has baked into it compulsive use. If you look at the meta document here, the idea is that it's giving you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or post. So these platforms are designed to exploit adolescents, and especially to look at and take advantage of some of these neurobiological vulnerabilities, giving you that dopamine hit to suck you into the platform. And for adolescents, as Dr. Prinstein talked about, is this time of brain development when adolescents are particularly oriented towards those rewards, particularly social rewards. Now, one area that has been getting a lot of attention around the United States as well as countries around the world is the idea of having smartphones in school. In North Carolina, for example, they're passing laws that will go into effect in January that all schools need to have policies that restrict smartphone use in schools. And so we're working hard to actually do the science to find out what is the role of smartphones in school? How is it impacting adolescents? What are the potential ways that it's hurtful, harmful, or potentially helpful for adolescents in schools? So if you look at some of the data, there is a fair amount of distraction when adolescents have access to their smartphones in schools. But this is also the case on a laptop, for example. If somebody's off task on a laptop in the classroom, not only is it interfering with the adolescent's own ability to focus and pay attention, but those around them, the bystanders, are severely impacted by the distraction as well. So if your peer next to you is surfing the web, going shopping, then the peers next to them, their ability to focus on schoolwork is impacted as well. And I think that there's this misperception that people can multitask, that adolescents can be on their phone, shopping, listening to their teacher, having their DMs in the background and music going on. But in reality, this is more like task shifting, where the brain really has to reorient to different tasks at hand. And we're not very good at that. And so it's pretty important for us to limit the ways in which adolescents have technology in the classroom because it's going to impact their ability to focus and engage in the classroom environment. This is also related to the way that teachers can teach themselves. There's evidence coming out that's showing that teachers are reporting greater distress and lower job satisfaction when their kids or students have access to technology, especially their smart devices in the classroom. And this is impacting, or sorry, this is some quick snapshot at what I think helps demonstrate the scope of the problem. So we scraped the phones of several groups of adolescents to look at their screen time and engagement on their phones during school instruction time. And if we look at just how long they're on their phones, older adolescents are on their phones for about 20 to almost 30 minutes of every hour of the school day. So they are spending 25% to 30% of each hour on their devices. And for younger adolescents, it's a little bit less, ranging from 8 to sort of 15 minutes. So in short, adolescents are on their phones constantly throughout the school day. And what are they doing? The figure on the right is showing the different apps that they're using. And perhaps not surprisingly, the majority of that time is spent on social media, as well as what the Apple device classifies as entertainment, which is largely YouTube videos. And so adolescents are largely not using their smart devices in the classroom for educational purposes, but are engaging in more social media and entertainment-like behaviors. If you look at how technology use might be shaping adolescents' ability to engage in cognitive control and other aspects of intellectual development, this is research from the ABCD study of over 10,000 adolescents that's showing that the rate at which adolescents use social media, so adolescents who are not using social media are depicted in the green bar, whereas adolescents who show high increasing social media use are depicted with the red bar. And across the board, no matter what we're looking at, their reading comprehension, their memory, their processing speed, adolescents who engage in high rates of social media use have detriments in terms of their cognitive and intellectual development. So this is clearly interfering with their ability to engage academically. Now, one of the perhaps more recent and increasing ways in which adolescents engage with technology is the more recent introduction of chatbots. Chatbots have increased really exponentially, and we're seeing a lot more technology being created that includes AI that is built for children and adolescents to engage with chatbots. It's taking time away from their social interactions with humans. About 70% of teens are using AI chatbots. This ranges from using it for seeking out social information, but also other aspects of seeking help and engaging in things that may not be appropriate. They report that they trust AI more than they trust their parents and their teachers. It's interfering with their ability to engage and develop strong social competencies because there's not the natural sort of friction that occurs from a give and take in these social relationships that we have. AI chatbots are frictionless. There is a lot of misappropriate use of engaging in social emotions with the chatbots as well. Unfortunately, these are completely unregulated. There are many chatbots who are posing as therapists, sometimes even referring to themselves as psychologists, trying to give advice to youth in a way that is not appropriate for adolescents or even children to engage with. It uses and scrapes data from the entire internet, not necessarily creating or providing the best advice for the individual talking to the chatbot. And adolescents and children are oftentimes sharing their data without the appropriate consent or reminders of what they're contributing their data to. And so this is very concerning for us. We know now emerging data showing kids as young as 8 years old are engaging in conversations with chatbots. And the type of information that they are seeking is not necessarily just like useful questions that you might Google, but a lot of adolescents are going on chatbots and seeking out information about sex and violence and things that would be more appropriate to talk to a trusted adult with. They're now creating toys that include chatbots for individuals as young as 0, toys that are engaging to children up to 6, so that they are developing these relationships with robots instead of with humans. And our last area that we want to talk about today is the role of social media on brain development. As we've been talking about, there's this rise in the use of social media and technology during adolescence, during this really important developmental period when the brain is undergoing so much reorganization. And there is a lot of emerging research starting to show the effects of using technology on the developing brain. For example, research coming out again from the ABCD study has shown that short form video use like TikTok or Instagram Reels, greater use of this type of social media use is related to a host of negative outcomes: poor cognition, poor attention and inhibitory control. And work that's come out of our center showing that adolescents who are engaging in greater smartphone use, more uninhibited smartphone use, have poorer cognitive control. And when it comes to the brain development, it appears that this is um, occurring via changes in the way that the brain is developing. So adolescents who are engaging in more screen time, short form video content, more habitual social media use, they're more likely to have an increase in ADHD symptoms a year later. And this is explained by changes in the way that their brains are developing. So there is a very core aspect of brain development in explaining the links between how individuals engage with technology and later symptoms like ADHD. We've been trying to understand the way in which adolescents are using and engaging in technology and social media use, and how this might be shaping the function of their brains, how it's not just changing the structure, but how their brains sort of respond to their environment. And so we've collected objective measures of their smartphone use. We scrape this data from their phones, so it's not retrospective, and it results in thousands of data points that allow us to look at the frequency and amount of which adolescents are using their phones. This is a busy figure, but it is showing every day of our data collection across 2 weeks. So every column there is a day, every dot is a person. And the top figure here is showing how often adolescents are just picking up and checking their phone, checking for updates, checking for whether their social media got likes. How often are they looking at their phones? And the average number of times an adolescent looks at their phone every day is 100 times, but the variability is pretty extreme. The y-axis there ranges from 0 to upwards of 400. So some adolescents are checking their phones 400 or more times a day. And if you look at just the sheer amount of time they spend on their phone, on average, adolescents are on their phones for over 8 hours a day. That's over a school day. That's over a work day for most adults. They are glued to their phone. So how might this behavior be related to their drive for rewards and the way their brains are developing? In short, when adolescents use social media, in the moments that they're using it, it relates to this greater drive to seek out more thrilling social and rewarding experiences. They crave more social interactions. Unfortunately, by the end of the day, it's related to greater loneliness. So, despite that drive to seek out more, it's not helping them to feel more connected to others. And if we look at what's happening in the developing brain, we've done longitudinal research where we're scanning teens' brains across time. And what we find is if you look at the blue line here, these are adolescents, the ones who are habitually checking their social media accounts. Their brains, in particular in neural regions that help us understand the motivational salience of our environment, their brains are becoming hypersensitive over time. That blue line there is showing the amount of activation in these networks of the brain that are telling us pay attention to the social environment, and their brains are becoming hypersensitive. And if you contrast that to adolescents in that orange line there, who are never uh, checking their social media, these non-habitual social media users, their brains are showing the developmentally normative decrease in this social reward sensitivity in the brain across time. So social media seems to be rewiring the way that our brains are developing across this really critical period of brain development. I think that is the end of our sort of formal presentation here. We have a series of tips that we're happy to go into, as well as, of course, answer and open it up for questions as well.
Just
Thank
really quickly, because we get so many questions about what it is that people can do. Yeah, we'll just end by running through. There are new research studies coming out demonstrating that waiting even 6 months to a year before introducing technology to kids may have long-term benefits. We are wanting for parents to talk with kids about how to use the direct messaging feature to use social media to enhance what adolescents are supposed to be doing, which is developing more complex social relationships during that time. We think that whether it's through use of parental controls or lobbying that you can do with policymakers, taking down opportunities for sexploitation or predators by taking away open chat adult content or free reigning AI, talking with kids about what they're seeing online so that way they come to you when they have questions, since we can't look over their shoulders all the time. We really should be taking down cyber hate and also disordered behavior, but no one's doing that yet. So it would be important to advise parents to talk with your kids about this, because they will probably see it before you have the chance to talk with them about it, and make sure that their first questions are asked and answered by you rather than by the internet. As Dr. Telzer was saying, it's time to take away the devices at 9 or 10 o'clock on a school night. Take them away, maybe from the adults too, and put them in a place in the house where they can charge that's not in the bedroom. Screen for problematic social media use. Remind kids that everything they see online is not real, even though our brains are made to make us believe what we see. And we should be investing in digital media literacy. So when kids get tech, they have to demonstrate competence in perhaps these 10 things before they are able to start running through the World Wide Web completely without control, or any kind of restraints whatsoever. We've been talking with middle schoolers and high schoolers directly about these issues. It's been very fruitful to ask them to muse about why they think social media was invented and how folks make a profit. The vast majority of them have not seen all of the data that are scraped from their device when they download these apps, but it's all available at the App Store. This is just a cut and paste straight from the App Store. And let me tell you, when teens see this information, they kind of freak out with new knowledge, with new power, and with new information that helps them to make different decisions about what they can do. Hopefully that's useful, and we're happy to answer as many questions as you have.
Doctors, thank you so much for that. The chat is already full of questions. Maybe we can just go down, but maybe related to where you just ended, Erica Wagner was asking a question of like, do you find that sharing the data on frequency of phone use with teens encourages teens to do it more or do it less? Or like, how does that actually get processed?
Yeah, most teens these days do recognize that they have some addiction-like qualities. The problem is that they don't think that there's anything wrong with that necessarily because they feel like, well, it's like being addicted to caffeine, some kids said. It's not a big deal. It's not until we show them how that's changing their brain development and literally the size of their brain growth do they start to realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe all the time that I'm spending on the technology is ultimately going to affect me. And that's when they start to really connect it with concern.
And how does that compare to adults? Like when it comes to like the number of times they pick up their phones or time on social media, stuff like that.
I
Yeah,
don't
kids
know
are
if we
using
have.
it more than adults, but we don't have a lot of information on adults these days. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say most of the research is so focused on the teens that we don't have that quantified amount like we collected with the kids, but they are on it more. But whether it's, I mean, we can all answer for ourselves where we think we are on that spectrum, but it probably is higher um, than some of us want to be as well.
I mean, it's definitely higher for me than I'd like to admit. Maybe I'll just go down the questions. Like, what percentage and what age say they trust AI more than parents and teachers? And do you have a sense of like on what topics?
Yeah, so actually, I believe the majority of kids across ages, and most of this research has been done with school-age kids, so like middle to high school age kids, mostly on information, but the information, so in other words, factual information. But a lot of that information is, remember, coming in a context that is sometimes um, asserting values or a bias in the way that that information is scraped from the web. The bigger concern that people are just starting to learn about now is the increase in AI chatbot toys for birth through 6 years old. Because what we know there is that kids develop through a scaffolding process where we don't just tell kids the answer, we don't just give them the information, we slowly help them develop and learn the information with correction and modification as they go. And today, at least, chatbots don't do that. They're not sensitive to the user's own competence level. So unfortunately, we know that especially in communities where kids may not have access to resources like daycare or enriching activities after school, we're probably going to see what we saw with social media, which is that tablet becomes a pretty good babysitter if the parent has to do errands. And if now we're talking about an AI chatbot toy that knows the kids' names and seems to be teaching them, parents may or may not realize that they might start offloading more of the parenting onto them, but it'll be done in a way that we know doesn't work. It's not scaffolded, developed practice. It's just giving rote information to kids.
How much of this then is a question? I'll keep on going on the questions, but how much of this is also not just educating, it's educating parents on how to parent in as this new technology comes out. Like, how do you compare this to like previous generations of technology? And like, someone in the chat was mentioning like in the 80s, my parents said TVs were bad for me. Like, but this seems different than just that passive kind of technology.
So, Eva, I'll just mention this because APA, we did put out an advisory on video content to really try and look at that exact question. There's actually video content that can be very helpful for development. And obviously, there's also video content that can be really bad. But there's something about these functions and features that are changing how the content is influencing brain development. So when you're watching something on TV, there are regulations that say inappropriate for kids. There are safeguards with movie ratings, and you don't get the like button on seeing how many other people reacted the way that you did or the way that you think you're supposed to when you're watching it on a TV screen. But with social media, there's something very different. And we didn't take time in this presentation, but there's the whole paper that we've produced to talk about all of the ways that the social context has changed with quantifying information. Now it's not just what you see, but there's actually votes on how many people like you and like what you said, and algorithmic information that is now giving you information you didn't ask for. So this is a bit different than what we see on TV. Sorry, Eva, I don't know if you want to add anything
Yeah, I was
to
going to
that.
say
Yeah,
pretty much exactly that. And
yeah.
just to, I think, ground this in a powerful statistic, there was a study that showed that women, for example, who have body image concerns, the algorithms are 4,000 times more likely to feed them content with toxic body image related content. So you might, any, any human might be exposed to one toxic body thing, but add in your own vulnerabilities and the algorithms learn that and feed you more and more and more of that. So the content is bad on its own and then increases in severity because of the algorithms.
I'm going to jump around on the questions, and I apologize. I love the fact that questions, please keep feeding them in. But, we're training, there's a question in the chat, we're training teenage girls to move from consumers to creators when it comes to this type of technology. Like, is there a thread in your research on how that, like, how does that creation or the act of creation sort of like impact their like agency, the way they see themselves and how that plays out? It's not just, again, the consuming of this content.
Yeah, there's literature, and Mitch and one of his grad students, I think, coined this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mitch, but this idea of digital status seeking, where individuals are posting things, seeking out likes, being content creators in order to gain that sense of status. And in the online world, there's no end to the ways in which you can quantify and seek out and engage in that kind of behavior. And it's related to a host of negative outcomes, riskier behavior, poor mental health. We have some data, not yet published, showing links to differences in how the brain responds for adolescents who engage in high digital status seeking behaviors. So it's transforming, I think, a lot of ways in which individuals engage in that status where there's these markers associated with it and this ability to craft and change and increase that in a digital environment.
I mean, so basically all just seems bad is what it really comes down to. Do you, does tying it to the physical effects of like, vision, eye strain, etc. help at all? Or is that sort of like a orthogonal issue?
I mean, it does sound all bad, but there are some good things you can do. The thing is, the platforms are really moving kids less and less. I should say, so recently, in testimony, Meta employees indicated that actually the majority of interactions on their platforms are now not with your friends. They're now with advertisements and with bots and with AI generated content. So there is the potential to really do some great things with this technology. But we're seeing that the consumer kind of model is really focused on engagement for as long as possible. And kids do have a love-hate relationship with this. When we ask them to get off their device for a single day, either for our research or for our classrooms, kids actually love it. They feel freed up. They are amazed. As many of them will say, this is the first time I have not used my phone for 24 hours in 10 years, right? So, and they just don't even know what it's like to try and not use your phone for even an hour, let alone for 24 hours. And they're very happy when they get that opportunity. I think that kids need just a little push to see what's possible. But if you've grown up only thinking the only way I can interact with my friends is through this device, then taking the device away is like taking their friends away. So we really have to think about how to help them understand there are ways to do this that can be healthy, that can be good, that can even involve your phone. But don't get caught in the tractor beam of just being on there to make someone else money and you getting engaged on there for longer than you even wanted to in the first place. And a lot of kids are remarkably responsive to that. It's just we haven't had that dialogue directly with kids in that way before as a society.
I have a few people asking about causation and correlation. Like, are we
Mhm.
like are how confident are we that this is a causal thing versus a correlated problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is there's lots of emerging evidence now, especially from some of the longitudinal studies. And we showed some of the studies from this big national data set, the ABCD study, that shows, for example, that adolescents who engage in more social media use show greater depression a year later, but greater depression does not predict greater social media a year later, as an example. So I think that there's emerging evidence to really highlight that there are causal links between the ways that adolescents are engaging in social media and their mental health. The same with ADHD symptoms. It seems to be um, a causal link there. Of course, there's bidirectional association. So there's going to be links going both ways, but there is, I think, quite a lot of evidence now to show pretty clearly that the tech use, social media use is causing mental health issues. With the sleep, it is extremely causal. We have very well controlled experiments for that. And so I think we can be pretty confident in those links now.
So
There's also been some really interesting withdrawal studies where they've randomized some kids to get off their device for a while and other kids to stay on. And there's been a lot of these, and they have some mixed results. They're all, when you summarize them in a meta analysis, it looks like getting off social media, your mental health improves. But a really interesting one that came out just a couple of weeks ago showed that in their design, they took kids off of just social media. So they didn't take them away from their devices or all screen time. And what they found was that kids who went off social media filled up all that time with other things on their screens. So taking away the social media, they still use their screens just as much. But interestingly, they still showed the mental health improvements. So that really suggested that it wasn't the screen time that was the problem. It was the social media that was the problem. Because if you take away those apps and they spend the whole time on screens anyway, they still show the mental health improvements.
I know we only have a minute left, but do you have examples of places that have done the right thing, quote unquote, and how can we learn and copy those?
Well, the big thing is what's happening in schools right now. Communities have a lot more power. Your home and your community is much easier to change than our society or the platform or the laws. So, homes that are keeping tech away from kids, talking with kids, keeping them out of the bedrooms, really powerful. Schools that are taking them out of the schools, at least during instructional time, really powerful. And also, we should look around the world. Our kids in America are currently getting the worst version of these products because in many countries, especially in Western Europe, we're seeing that changes have been made to the platforms themselves because of federal laws in those countries. So, yeah, so we can look to our neighbors around the world to look for some really positive examples.
Well, doctors, thank you so much. As you can see by the chat, I think so many people are engaged by this. So super really appreciate the time you've spent with us today, educating us. I'm sure we're all about to go and tell as many people as we can talk to about what we learned today. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and
Thank you
feel
so
free
much.
to reach out. And it looked like there were lots more questions, so we're happy to continue the discussion.
Oh, that's great. Maybe I'll figure out a way to like copy and paste all of these and I can send them over.
Great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks again. Thanks everyone
Thank you
for
so
joining.
much.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.